I actually, I'm very honored that you asked me to speak here, and I'm also, in some ways, I think it's really appropriate that I'm speaking to you this morning because I am a native of Seattle. I'm actually from here. It seems like, you know, when you walk the streets of Seattle, it certainly feels like 90% of the people are new in town, and that's because of the explosive growth that we've experienced. But I'm actually from here, and so I would like to look at the next 25 minutes as my love letter to Seattle and my hearty and warm welcome to all of you. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about, I think that I'm actually on this mic, right? Okay, so I can kind of walk around a little bit. I'd like to really show you what Seattle's about and ways that we can actually broker more synergy and also the equity and inclusion stuff and why that's important. So, unlocking success from Sasquatch culture. So a lot of you have already been in town maybe since Saturday or Sunday. You may not realize, first thing that you need to understand about Seattle is that we are hella weird, okay? We are weird. In fact, I encourage you not to look at this photo too closely because they're not clothed. Those are not outfits that they're wearing, they're painted. And so don't look too closely. This is the annual Fremont, quote unquote, center of the universe solstice parade. And that means that the summer solstice every year, these people, they kind of, and this is not something I do, by the way, but this is something Seattle is just crazy about because they want to, you know, there's so little sunshine here that when the sun does come out, they want to celebrate, and they want to celebrate riding bicycles while naked. And so, but even so, they get their Trek on. See that? Any Star Trek fans here? Star Trek's huge here, I'm not sure why. There you go. So we're weird. And I know that sometimes Portland recently has really gotten a lion's share of being, you know, the land of hipsters and all of that, but I assure you, we started it here first. Without Seattle, there would be no Portland. You see the guy on the right, he just put on a mustache, and you know, that's all he did. He was just copied the guy on the left. So, and then there's also a lot of, you know, because I'm from the tech sector, we like to compare ourselves to Silicon Valley, right? And here's a graphic that we ran on GeekWire a couple of years ago, which is Silicon Valley geeks versus Seattle geeks. And it's probably too small for you to read, but the bottom line is there ain't really much of a difference. They're kind of the same person, and demographically and psychographically they're very similar, except the guy on the right, the Seattle geek, is probably less likely to be a person of color and drinks more coffee. And it actually, in terms of demographic profile, a little older than the person on the left. In the Valley, they tend to be a little bit younger by about 7 years. So, but generally speaking, the cultures are very, very similar. Does anyone know who this is? Anyone? It's George Lucas. It's the young George Lucas. Now, in 1976, George Lucas made this weird little movie about these people fighting in space with lasers and all of that, and his studio, 20th Century Fox, didn't know what to do with the movie. And they said, hold up, George, hold up. Before we widely release it, we're not actually sure that people are going to like this movie, so why don't you pick a city where you can test this movie? Just pick a city where we can get some data on whether this is going to do okay or not. And so, of course, he picks the nerdiest, geekiest, but what he thinks is one of the smartest cities, and there you have it, Star Wars and Seattle. Seattle was one of the first cities, if not the first city, where Star Wars was tested, and it was only when it did well, with lines multiple times around the block, that they will release it more widely. And actually, I'm in that line right there. I'm just only 8 years old, but you can't see me. And this fellow, I'm just positing further evidence that Seattle were really weird. Just 35 miles from where you're sitting right now, the world was first introduced to this fellow right here. This is a couple of guys were hiking in Mount Rainier and filmed Mr. Sasquatch walking around. Now, I don't judge or editorialize. It's up to you to decide, but you know, this happened on Mount Rainier. Now, I'm an optimist, and I want to believe, okay? And is it any surprise that also the very first term, the very first use of the term flying saucer and UFO was also occurred right here on Mount Rainier when an Idaho pilot first saw a flying saucer, an unidentified flying object. That was right here in 1947 this happened. So I'm telling you, I think we can lay to rest that Seattle is definitely the weirdest city in North America. So I did sell 2 companies to Google. I was the first person to do that. That in and of itself is weird because as I've established, I'm from Seattle. And hello, Microsoft, Amazon, they're right here in our backyard, so I have to sell them to a Mountain View, a California company. But that is a little bit of a strange one, and I wanted to actually bridge the weird culture that is here in Seattle and what we do here as entrepreneurs. I think that growing up, it was very easy for me to have this sense here in the culture that we don't have to be defined by these rigid guidelines of who we want to be, right? We can do anything and we can dream anything. And this is a town where there's still very much that frontier. Perhaps it was because this was one of the last stops prior to the gold rush, that a few blocks away in Pioneer Square. That's where the miners would stock up before finally, embarking on their very long journey to Alaska to seek fortune. But much of that entrepreneurial spirit exists here in Seattle. And I have to add that as a Chinese American, this is a particularly hard thing to do. I'm the black sheep of the family, actually. I don't know if many of you in Philadelphia have heard of this old joke amongst Chinese Americans, which is that someday in the future, in the year 2040, there's going to be a Chinese American president. And that president is getting sworn in, and at the inauguration ceremony, the president's mom is there, okay? And the mom's friend turns to her and said, "Oh, Mrs. Lee, aren't you proud of your son or daughter that she's going to be president of the United States, the first Chinese American president?" And Mrs. Lee says, "That's nothing. You should see her brother. He's a doctor." So for me to actually do this is highly weird, and it's a true story. I'm 51 years old, and it wasn't until I was about 46 when my photo was in the Seattle magazine for something, and my mother finally understood what I did for a living. So there you have it. So very weird. I did start this website. All I do is really start websites, and they're just web pages. And one that's going really well right now is GeekWire, and we are based here locally in Seattle, but we are a national news site. So actually, about 65% of our readership is outside the state of Washington. Not surprisingly, much of our readership is in the Bay Area, and also in other parts of California, such as Los Angeles, and then also New York. Sort of in that order, and then other tech centers such as Austin, Denver, and then also in China, overseas, precisely because we cover a lot of news about Alibaba and Baidu and those companies, which some of the other tech news sites don't cover. And so we report on news every day. And by the way, this was actually pulled from this weekend, and this very much represents sort of what I call the second wave of the tech boom that's happening here, where it's not necessarily apps and websites or web services that are trying to solve a consumer problem. It's more that now we're starting to get a cohort of companies that are solving the failures of prior apps and websites. So I think that's an interesting thing to pay attention to. So as the chairman, we convene about 10 events a year. We have about 800 to 1,700 people per event. Sometimes we bring on stage various heads of state, like Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, or Jeff Bezos, who has a great relationship with our reporters. I don't influence editorial, by the way. I just get out of their way and make sure that they have the resources that they need. But we also like to codify or to have a hub and to form this community that this tech industry rallies behind. And so we do fun events like big dodgeball and foosball tournaments, and people like Zillow and Expedia and Microsoft, they'll have their teams and come out and compete against each other. It's a lot of fun. I've also created a company called PicMonkey.com. We're the internet's most popular photo editor, and that also allows me to window into, in terms of the technology standpoint, what emerging technologies are important, and I want to bookmark some of that, and I'll skip over some of this stuff and talk a little bit about why I think that this is important. there are a number of stats that I don't know why they don't make the national headlines. And these are stats that have really come out in the last 18 months or so. So there's a lot of great research, and these are credible research institutions, whether they're banks or finance firms. But effectively, you know, I'm going to give you a few of them. If you add 3 women to your board of directors, your profitability actually increases. If you go from 0 women on your board of directors, you add 3 women, you are on average more profitable than that first company by 26%. Okay? If 33%, 1/3 of your C-suite consists of women, you are also going to outperform companies where you have less than 30% in the C-suite, and you're going to outperform in terms of profitability and return on equity. And the thing that I find most astounding that we don't talk about more loudly and proudly is that women make incredible leaders and CEOs. And as a matter of fact, in a 12-year longitudinal study done by Quantopian, which is a Boston finance firm, 80 female CEOs from across all kinds of different segments, right? Privately held, publicly traded, the consumer, B2B. 80 female CEOs over 12 years, they were found to actually outperform their male peers on the S&P 500 by 226% in terms of return on equity for shareholders. That's a fantastic number. And by the way, the point of this is not to sort of create the sense of one versus the other, or that one is better than the other. The point of this is to actually underscore the fact that right now it's very much stacked against women, right? So I'm really sort of appealing, and by the way, nor am I sort of hopefully not mansplaining to women about here's what women should do better to get ahead. You just need to talk like this or behave like that. No, it's not at all. I'm actually more appealing to the 97% of CEOs in this country who are male, to the 93% of board members who are male, and to the 88% of elected officials in this country who are male. To just say, let's make more room. Let's make more room. It's not just a fair thing. Thank you. And it's not just about fairness and equity. Of course, that's important, but it's actually smart from a business perspective because you get to unlock all this value, right? Those stats are just the tip of the iceberg, and there are more in the book where I talk about how this is really about unlocking greater value. And I know that for a fact that when I've started companies, that I really benefited from there being greater equity and inclusion at my companies. People often walk into one of my companies and say, bless you, and say, wait a minute, this does not look like a tech company. There's a lot of women here. There's people of all races, and so I feel like that is the very way that we're able to unlock value. Because when you do obviously have that diversity of thought, you get better ideas. You get better product features. You get a better understanding of who your customers are and what will really sell into that customer and what would not. So those are good things about unlocking value. I think Seattle has an opportunity. I'm very Seattle proud. I have to say, and I hope that I don't come off as being very pedantic when I talk about how much I love this city. And I think that we have the potential to show the world here is an interesting and an alternate way of doing things.